There are forces in this world that do not seek your freedom, but your submission. They smile as they conceal their intentions behind masks of charm, logic, and false care. These are the manipulators, those who twist reality to serve their own fragile egos. And if you are not conscious of them, you will become their puppet. But what if I told you that the manipulator is not only out there, but also within? That until you confront your own shadows, you will either be controlled or become the controller? Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Today, we make the unconscious conscious. Today, we expose the merciless manipulator. The manipulator seldom reveals their true face. What you encounter first is not the person, but the mask, the polished smile, the warm tone, the subtle flattery. It is disarming. It feels genuine. But it is not. This is the persona, a concept Carl Jung described as the socially acceptable mask we wear to fit into the world. In its healthy form, the persona helps us function and communicate. But when it is corrupted, when it is worn too tightly for too long, it becomes a disguise for deception. A manipulator crafts their persona with precision. They study what you need: validation, protection, love, approval, and they reflect it back at you. They become exactly who you want them to be. They mirror your values, echo your dreams, sympathize with your wounds. But they do this not to connect, but to control. Every kind word is calculated. Every gesture has strings attached. It is not love, it is leverage. You may find yourself drawn to them, feeling understood in ways you've never experienced. This is not accidental. It is strategic. They have learned that wearing the perfect mask can open any door, including the one to your trust. But behind that mask is often a fragmented self. Someone terrified of being exposed, rejected, or powerless. And so, to survive, they hide. Not just from the world, but from themselves. Over time, the mask becomes a prison not just for them, but for you. You begin to sense the cracks. The inconsistencies. The subtle manipulation. You question yourself: why do I feel so drained? Why do I doubt myself around them? This confusion is intentional. They depend on your uncertainty. The moment you begin to see through the mask, they adjust it, smoother, warmer, more convincing. But make no mistake, the longer you ignore your instincts, the deeper you fall into their illusion. To navigate this, you must train your perception. Jung believed that individuation, the process of becoming whole, requires us to see not only our own masks, but the masks of others. It means cultivating an inner awareness that sees beyond appearances. It means asking, is this person speaking from truth, or from performance? Are they transparent? Or are they carefully curating every moment of connection? The manipulator's mask can only survive in the dark. The more conscious you become, the more it crumbles. When you begin to see clearly, the spell breaks. You no longer mistake charm for character, or attention for affection. You begin to value integrity over charisma. Truth over comfort. This awareness does not make you cynical, it makes you wise. It allows you to engage with others without being ensnared by illusion. And most importantly, it invites you to examine your own mask. Where do you hide behind roles? Where do you manipulate with niceness instead of honesty? Because once you've seen the mask of the manipulator, you can no longer unsee it. And that, perhaps, is the beginning of true power, the power of a self that refuses to be deceived. Gaslighting is not simply a lie, it is a war on your reality. It is the deliberate twisting of your perception until you no longer trust your own thoughts, feelings, or memories. This is not an accident. It is a psychological tactic rooted in power and fear. And while it may seem like cruelty or arrogance on the surface, beneath it lies something deeper, more tragic, and more insidious: the unacknowledged shadow. Carl Jung taught that every human being carries a shadow, the unconscious parts of ourselves we reject, deny, or repress. These parts can be dark, yes, envy, rage, deceit, but also powerful, our strength, our intuition, our desires. The manipulator who gaslights you is someone at war with their own shadow. They cannot face the truth of who they are, so they displace that truth onto others. You become the liar. You become the unstable one. You become the problem. This is the essence of projection. What they despise in themselves, they condemn in you. If they are deeply insecure, they call you needy. If they fear being wrong, they insist you are always mistaken. If they lie to themselves constantly, they will accuse you of deception. They cannot own their darkness, so they place it on your shoulders, and then shame you for carrying it. Over time, this wears you down. You begin to second-guess yourself. You feel foggy, confused, isolated. You question whether your emotional reactions are valid. You wonder if your memory is faulty. Slowly, your inner compass starts to erode. This is not weakness, it is the natural consequence of being exposed repeatedly to distorted mirrors. And this is exactly what the gaslighter needs, for you to become so disconnected from your own truth that you turn to them for clarity. It is a deeply pathological dance, one that depends on your silence, your doubt, and your empathy. Often, the most emotionally attuned individuals, those who strive to understand others and avoid conflict, become the easiest targets. Not because they are foolish, but because they are generous. They are willing to consider the possibility that they might be wrong. And the manipulator exploits this open-mindedness with surgical precision. But understanding this dynamic is the beginning of liberation. Jung insisted that we must illuminate the unconscious if we are to reclaim our power. Gaslighting loses its grip the moment you start to see it for what it is, not a reflection of your inadequacy, but a projection of theirs. When you begin to observe the pattern without reacting, when you hold your inner ground despite the storm, you disrupt the entire system. This doesn't mean confrontation is always the answer. Sometimes the most powerful act is detachment. Sometimes it means walking away, not with anger, but with clarity. Because trying to convince a gaslighter of the truth is like trying to explain sunlight to someone who lives in a cave, and chooses to stay there. Most importantly, this confrontation must happen not just outwardly, but inwardly. We must ask ourselves, where do we gaslight ourselves? Where do we minimize our pain, suppress our instincts, rewrite our history to keep others comfortable? Because the external manipulator is far less dangerous than the internal one, the voice that says, maybe I'm just too sensitive, or maybe I deserve that, or maybe it really was my fault. To heal from gaslighting, we must make a sacred commitment, to trust our own perceptions again. To reclaim our emotional authority. To honor what we feel, even when it is inconvenient. And to recognize that our truth does not need external validation to exist. In the end, gaslighting is not just about control, it's about consciousness. The more awake you become, the less anyone can distort your reality. And in that awakening, you take back not just your mind, but your soul. Manipulation often doesn't begin with threats or commands, it begins with feelings. Subtle. Stirred. Triggered. The manipulator doesn't have to raise their voice or show their hand. Instead, they pull on invisible threads inside of you, emotional hooks that grip tightly: guilt, obligation, fear, hope, shame, love. These are not accidental, they are intentional. Where logic ends, emotional manipulation begins. The person who manipulates emotionally is an alchemist of control. They don't force you to stay. They make you feel like you must. They know which parts of you are soft, uncertain, or seeking validation. And they position themselves as the answer to those unspoken longings, then punish you emotionally if you ever question the arrangement. It's not always with words. Sometimes it's a sigh, a cold silence, withdrawal of affection, or a look of disappointment. It's not direct, it's energetic. Subtle, but slicing. Carl Jung understood that our emotions are sacred signals from the unconscious, messengers from the self. But when these signals are intercepted, twisted, and redirected by another person's agenda, we lose access to our inner compass. The manipulator rewires our responses. We begin to associate saying no with guilt, asserting a boundary with rejection, or expressing needs with selfishness. Slowly, we are trained, like animals in a psychological cage. The emotional hook becomes a loop. You feel guilt for disappointing them, so you comply. Then you feel resentment for complying, so you pull away. Then they trigger fear of abandonment or disapproval, and you return. The cycle continues. Not because you are weak, but because your emotional truth has been hijacked and weaponized against you. This form of control is particularly potent because it masquerades as love, concern, or care. The manipulator often presents their pressure as protection. I just worry about you, you always overreact, I know what's best for you. It feels like support, but it smells like ownership. They do not trust your decisions. They want you to feel incapable of choosing for yourself unless it aligns with their needs. And perhaps the most dangerous hook of all is the promise of love. Manipulators dangle affection like a reward for compliance. You are praised when you conform and punished, subtly or overtly, when you express individuality. But genuine love is not conditional. Real connection does not require shrinking, censoring, or sacrificing your core identity. To break free from emotional hooks, you must become fluent in your own emotional language. Ask yourself, is this feeling arising from within me, or is it being triggered to control me? Am I acting from love or from fear? From guilt, or from truth? This kind of self-inquiry requires radical honesty. It demands that you step out of emotional autopilot and into conscious sovereignty. Jung believed that the path to wholeness comes through awareness. The more conscious we become of our emotional responses, the less manipulable we are. You begin to feel the tug, but you don't move. You recognize the guilt, but you don't obey it. You sense the fear, but you choose from clarity. This is not emotional coldness. It is emotional maturity. You are not shutting down your feelings, you are reclaiming them. You are saying, these feelings are mine. They belong to me. And I will not let them be used as levers to control my choices. And so, the spell breaks. The emotional hooks dissolve. What once held you tightly now falls away, because the manipulator no longer has access to the most sacred part of you, your heart. When you master your emotions, not by repressing them, but by understanding them, you transcend the game of control entirely. You are no longer an instrument to be played. You become the composer of your own inner symphony. Not every manipulator is driven by malice. Some are driven by wounds, old, deep, and unacknowledged. They don't seek control out of cruelty, but out of fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of vulnerability, fear of insignificance. These individuals often began their lives not as manipulators, but as survivors, people who had to adapt to unstable environments, unpredictable caregivers, or emotional neglect. Over time, they learned that being direct or honest wasn't safe. That expressing needs led to punishment, not comfort. That love had to be earned, through pleasing, through hiding, through control. This is the archetype of the wounded healer turned manipulator. Carl Jung spoke often of the wounded healer, the one who gains insight and wisdom through their own pain, but who can also unconsciously transfer that pain onto others if it remains unhealed. These manipulators may not even realize they're manipulating. In their world, this is how connection has always worked, through subtle control, emotional bargaining, power dynamics masked as care. They are not evil, but they are dangerous, because they haven't faced their inner child, the one who learned that love is transactional. They repeat cycles they never had the tools to break. When you confront their behavior, they often recoil, deflect, or become defensive, not out of arrogance, but because your awareness threatens their carefully constructed reality. And in many cases, they genuinely believe they are helping you, guiding you, protecting you. They have confused manipulation with care. They don't see the difference because they were never shown another way. This creates a very confusing dynamic, especially if you are someone empathetic or intuitive. You sense their pain. You see the fear behind their behavior. You might even feel a deep compassion for them. And because of this, you may stay too long. You may excuse the manipulation, rationalize the control, minimize the emotional damage, telling yourself, they didn't mean it, or they're just hurting. And perhaps they are. But pain is not a pass for destruction. Trauma is an explanation, not a justification. This is where discernment becomes crucial. It is possible to have compassion for someone and still protect yourself. It is possible to understand their suffering without letting them make you suffer. You can acknowledge that someone is operating from their wounds while refusing to become the bandage they keep tearing off. The truth is, many of these wounded manipulators were never taught how to self-soothe, how to self-reflect, how to hold space for their own emotions. Instead, they outsource all emotional regulation to those around them. You become their mirror, their therapist, their stabilizer. And if you try to step away from that role, they panic. They pull harder. They might guilt you, blame you, or try to reel you back in, not because they want to hurt you, but because they don't know how to be with themselves. This doesn't mean you owe them healing. It means you must recognize your limits. You must ask yourself, am I here because I'm being manipulated into feeling responsible for their pain? Am I sacrificing my own peace trying to fix someone who hasn't asked to be fixed, or worse, doesn't believe they're broken? Jung emphasized the need to confront the shadow, not just in others, but in ourselves. And part of that confrontation means recognizing when our own inner wounded healer is keeping us tethered to unhealthy dynamics out of pity, guilt, or saviorhood. Healing is possible. But it cannot be forced. The manipulator must choose to face their pain. They must choose to break the cycle. You cannot drag them into consciousness. You can only walk your own path with clarity, boundaries, and courage, and by doing so, become a mirror of what self-responsibility looks like. In the end, we must remember, pain is universal. But what we do with that pain, that is where choice begins. Some use it to control. Others use it to awaken. And some, when they are ready, use it to heal, not just themselves, but everyone they touch. There comes a moment in every journey when awareness begins to eclipse illusion. When the fog lifts, and you start to see the manipulation not as a personal attack, but as a deeply unconscious pattern. This is the turning point, the invitation to transcend the game. No longer caught in the web of power plays, emotional traps, or identity-based fears, you begin to realize that the true battleground is not out there, it is within. The manipulator thrives on your unconsciousness. They rely on your automatic responses, your emotional triggers, your unmet needs. They need you to react instead of reflect. But once you become conscious, truly conscious, you step outside the game board. You stop playing the role of the victim. You stop dancing to the rhythm of guilt, fear, or obligation. You become the observer. The master of your own internal world. Carl Jung spoke often about the journey of individuation, the lifelong process of becoming whole. And part of becoming whole means integrating not only the light within us, the joy, the love, the potential, but also the darkness. The wounds, the fears, the shadows. When you've been manipulated, there is often a temptation to stay in the victim mindset. To focus solely on what was done to you. But staying in that space only continues the cycle. True liberation happens when you ask the deeper question, why was I vulnerable to this? What part of me needed this experience to wake up? That's when the shift begins. You stop seeing yourself as broken. You stop clinging to the identity of someone who was used, fooled, or controlled. Instead, you begin to recognize the power in the pain. The lesson behind the loss. You understand that being manipulated once doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. But staying manipulated, allowing it to continue, ignoring the signs. That is a choice. And now, you choose differently. You start to reclaim your voice, not the loud, defensive voice of reaction, but the quiet, grounded voice of inner truth. You speak not to convince others, but to express who you are. You set boundaries not to punish, but to protect your peace. You begin to trust your intuition, that sacred inner compass that was once silenced under the weight of guilt or fear. You no longer ask others to validate your truth, because you have already validated it within yourself. To transcend the game is not to become cold or detached. It is not to dominate others or retreat into isolation. It is to live from a place of self-awareness so profound that manipulation cannot find purchase in your psyche. You see the tactic, you feel the tug, but you remain unmoved. Because you have done the work. You have met the parts of you that once craved approval, feared abandonment, or confused control with love. And in that meeting, you transformed them. This is the essence of personal mastery, not control over others, but sovereignty over self. You begin to recognize that every external conflict, every manipulative relationship, every betrayal, was a mirror showing you something within that was ready to be healed. When you face it directly, you no longer need the mirror. The outer drama dissolves because the inner lesson has been learned. There is a profound stillness that comes with this realization. You no longer feel the need to expose the manipulator or avenge the past. Instead, you walk forward, not in bitterness, but in wisdom. Not in defense, but in strength. Because now, you are not just reacting to life, you are responding from a center that cannot be shaken. And perhaps most beautifully of all, you become an example. Your presence begins to teach others, without words, what it looks like to live awake. You stop perpetuating the cycle of manipulation, because you no longer manipulate yourself. You've broken the contract. You've stepped out of the game. And in doing so, you show others that they can too. So when you ask, how do I protect myself from being manipulated? The answer is not in control, avoidance, or retaliation. It is in awakening. In knowing yourself so deeply that no one can define you. In honoring your truth so fully that no one can twist it. That is how you transcend the game. That is how you move from victim to the master of your own soul. The one who manipulates mercilessly is not powerful, they are fragmented. And the one who submits blindly is not weak, they are unconscious. But you can awaken. Awaken to the masks. Awaken to your emotions. Awaken to your own shadow. Because once you see manipulation for what it is, you are no longer prey, you are power itself. As Jung reminds us, who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens. So, awaken, and let no one, not even your own ego, manipulate you again.